And we're back, chess kids, as we go round and round on the carousel of pieces. We just did the rook, and today it's all about the bishop. He's right there, front and center. He's our star for the day. Now, if the rook is kind of like the muscle man of chess, moving up and down and left and right, the bishop is more like the samurai of chess, slicing and dicing along the diagonals. Bishops move simply diagonally. Now, in my previous video, I believe I started highlighting all the squares that pieces could move to, but for the bishop, let's instead use all of the black pawns at our disposal. I know we haven't learned the pawn yet, but you at least know what a pawn looks like because I'm about to put one on the board. The bishop can land on f5. The bishop can also go to g6, or the bishop could go all the way to h7. The bishop gets to move as far or as short as he wants to, as long as he moves diagonal. This pawn can go here, this pawn can go here, and look at this. We are completing our tour de bishop. That's right. Does not go through the Pyrenees, though. It just goes through our chessboard. These are all the different squares the bishop can move to. Now, if you are an expert chess player, you know that I have put more pawns on the board than exist in one bag of pieces. But little did you know that my entire house is full of chess pieces. So I can put all 64 black pawns on all 64 squares. You didn't need to know that, but when I have a garage sale, please come by and buy my black pawns because I have too many of them. Okay, let's count. How many different squares can the bishop move to? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, and we've got 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and 10, and 11, and 12, and 13. I hope you are not tristodecaphobic, because 13 is the magic number for the bishop. When the bishop is right in the middle of the board, that is when he is at his most powerful. That's actually true of pretty much all chess pieces. Now, here's one very important thing that I want you to learn. When the bishop starts the game on a light square, or you can call it a white square, I'm cool with that, the bishop will stay on the light squares for the rest of his life. This bishop on e4 can move to g6. And on the next turn, he can go just one square to f7. And on the next turn, he can move all the way to the square a2 if he wants to. Now, just like with the rook, the bishop captures by simply running into a piece. So let's put these poor black pawns on the board. They're kind of just target practice today. When the bishop moves diagonally and captures this pawn, he has to stop, and it would then be black's turn. So if you've got two pawns on the same diagonal, you cannot capture them both in the same turn. What is this, checkers? No, it is not checkers. That's probably the only fun thing about checkers that chess does not have. There is no time in chess you can capture two pieces at once. There is no double or triple jump. So if the bishop captures this pawn, then it would be black's turn, and black would have the opportunity to do something about the fact that the next pawn would be in danger. Now, let's do some bishop planning. For example, let's put the bishop on the square f1, which is one of the squares that bishop starts on. Of course, the other bishop would start on c1. We'll get to that when we get all the pieces set up on the chessboard. Okay, so you're the bishop.
Hello.
The enemy pawn is right here. If I gave you two moves in a row, chess kids, where could the bishop move to capture that pawn? You need to make a plan plan. If you move the bishop just one square, the bishop cannot go up the board. What are you, a rook? Are you having an identity crisis? That would not be a good first move. Also, I know it's a lot of fun to move the bishop as far as you possibly can, but that's not really making a plan. That would be like if you walked to school but had no plan, and instead you just kept walking in a straight line until your body got tired. You would end up in, I don't know, Kansas? Who knows where you'd end up, but it wouldn't be to school. Let's put the bishop back on f1. Instead, let's move the bishop, and you tell me when to stop, okay? Yell into your screen when to stop. No, yell louder, I can't hear you. Oh, it's too loud. It's too loud, you're waking up the neighbors. Bishop to c4, that is the best move for the bishop. On the next turn, if that poor pawn is still sitting there, he's gonna get eaten for breakfast. Now, there was an alternate solution. Some of you realize the bishop can not only zig, but he can zag. He can go to this square, bishop to h3, and like a samurai who saw that coming, the bishop will continue his ninja ways and capture that black pawn on the next turn. Now, when I'm teaching chess in person, yes, I used to do that for like 15 years in a row. You would have been lucky enough if you lived in my city to maybe have me come to your class each week. That's where Fun Master Mike got his start in chess teaching. I used to play this fun game with my students in person, and here it is on the screen. And we call this Tom versus Jerry. But I'm not even sure we have the rights to use this graphic, so we're just gonna call it Cat versus Mouse. Okay, the rook we learned in our opening video. And remember, the rook moves up and down and left and right. So the rook is going to be the cat. The bishop is going to be the mouse. And if any of you have ever watched certain cartoons, you know that the rook chases the mouse, and the mouse pretty much always gets away. So I would have half the class play the cat and the other half play the mouse. And we would start by asking the class, where could Mr. Cat move to attack Mrs. Mouse? And so, for example, this rook could travel sideways. And if we stop on this square, you can see the cat is about to get the mouse. And then we might have the mouse run away. So for example, this bishop, if he wanted to, he could move, let's say, 2 squares. Is he safe? Yes. Yes, I do think he's safe, because the rook, if he travels all the way up, in fact, that would be a very silly move if the rook went all the way up to c8, because then the mouse would get the cat, and I've never seen that happen in real life, so I'm not sure what that would look like, but that would be a very bad move for white. So instead, let's have the rook travel up the board, and here comes the cat. Boom! The cat is about to get the mouse. Now, this mouse can get away. Would that be a safe square for the mouse? Yeah, I think so. What about if we just move 1 square? Would that be a safe square? I think so. What if the bishop travels 2 squares and lands on c4? Oh no! Then the cat would get the mouse and the cartoon would be over, and we would not know what to do with the rest of our day. So it's a fun game you can play on your own. Just have the rook chase the bishop, and the bishop's only job is to get away from the rook. However, sometimes the bishop can actually capture the rook if the rook lands on the wrong diagonal, okay? So for example, if the bishop moves 1 square and lands there, and then for some reason this rook travels here, then of course the bishop would get the rook. Now, one funny thing I want to point out. Let's move the rook back to this square, okay? And let's say instead the rook moves just 1 square. That's a pretty good move, right? Because the cat's about to get the mouse. If the rook stays on this square for the rest of his life, just pretend that white had some other pieces that he could move around, the bishop could actually never, ever capture the rook. The bishop could dance around the rook and go to all of these light squares, but the bishop is never able to land on a dark square. It's kind of like the shoes on your feet. No, I do not know what color they are, but I do know this. They will never change colors. When you wake up tomorrow morning, they will be the same colors. And this bishop, he's wearing light colored shoes, and well, I just made them red, didn't I? Okay, let's unhighlight that square. The bishop is on a light square. He's gonna have light colored shoes for the rest of his game. The bishop can never change the color square that he's on. I don't care if you give the bishop 100 moves, the bishop can never capture that rook as long as the rook is sitting still. And I do want to mention that in chess, we do consider the rook to be slightly more powerful, mostly for that reason. The rook can touch all 64 squares on the chessboard, but the bishop can only touch half of those squares. And if you know what half of 64 is, you either have a calculator, an iPhone, I forgot what kids use these days, or you're just really good at math. The bishop can move to only 32 squares of the chessboard. Okay, moving on. Now we're gonna play the same game that we played with the rook. We're gonna play the bishop trying to capture every single piece. We can call this the monster bishop. Only funny thing is that in this case, I don't want the bishop just capturing pawns. The bishop must end by capturing the rook. And for this game, black does not get to move at all. You must capture 1 black piece every turn until you finish with the capture of the double cheeseburger on h7, but we're gonna call him a rook. Okay, what's the bishop gonna capture first? Can the bishop capture this pawn? No, that's how a rook moves. Remember, rooks go up and down and left and right. That's not how bishops move. Bishops move diagonal, and can the bishop capture anything there? No, there's nothing there. That's a bunch of thin air. So we're gonna move the bishop this way, and we're gonna capture this pawn on c4, and everybody's happy. Okay, on the next turn, if this bishop were a rook, that'd be a very happy rook. It'd be hungry, hungry rook. The bishop could capture this, or this if he was a rook, but he's not. He's a bishop. So the bishop's gonna move diagonal and capture this pawn. And on the next turn, we're gonna go just 1 diagonal square and capture. Now, in real life, the rook could capture the bishop here if I was nice and gave black a move, but we're not being nice to black today. Okay, the bishop can now capture this pawn. Again, the rook could capture if it was real life, but it's not real life. It's bishop monster. The bishop can now go diagonal and capture this pawn. Reminder, when you capture a pawn, you have to stop. The bishop could then go diagonal and capture this pawn, and I think you might see the end. Now the bishop is going to capture this pawn, and then this pawn, and then the bishop gets to be the hero at the end, and the bishop captures the rook on h7, and we are done with bishop monster. Just like we did with the rook, I'm also going to introduce to you some advanced ideas. That's right, we have an advanced idea alert, alert, alert. In this position, I've given black 2 pieces that should be familiar to you because we've got a rook and a bishop. And do you see something similar about those 2 pieces? That's right, they're both black pieces, very observant. Also, they're both on my computer screen, so that's 2. However, there's something else. The bishop and the rook are both on the same diagonal. And this is something you should be watching out for in chess because this is when bishops thrive. When you have 2 enemy pieces on the same diagonal and your bishop is the same color as that diagonal, your bishop can do some damage. If our bishop was on a dark square, well, it couldn't do any damage at all. But luckily, our bishop is on a light square, and that diagonal that I've drawn an arrow on is also a light square diagonal. So if you move your bishop and you land on top of the line, which just disappeared, but it was right there, and you land on f3, now black is in a pin. That is a word that we introduced in our first video on rooks. It's kind of an advanced term, but remember, we did warn you. There was an advanced idea coming. Okay, now black has a problem. The rook is clearly in danger. The rook probably wants to move to get away. But if the rook does move to get away, then the bishop would see through the thin air and capture the black bishop up there. And black looks like he's going to lose some kind of pieces. Now, black could just sit still and let the bishop capture, and then black's bishop could actually capture back. And in that situation, white would get a rook, white would lose a bishop, but remember I hinted that actually in chess, rooks are a little better than bishops, so even though both sides would lose a piece, white would get a bigger slice of cake. So now we have a double, super, triple, master level idea alert. Okay, here's your big question. Where could black move the rook to get the rook out of danger, but also lend a helping hand? We would call it defend the bishop on a8. Where could the rook move to defend his own bishop? Okay, maybe you see more than one answer. This rook could travel up to the square c8. Remember, rooks go up and down, side to side. And on the next turn, if the bishop captures, then the rook would come over and capture back, and black would actually lose nothing. Now you might say, Fun Master Mike, black actually lost a bishop. Yeah, but he also gained a bishop, so in chess, we don't think that you lose anything when you make an equal trade. It's like when you give someone $1 and they give you 4 quarters back, you don't say, I lost my dollar bill. You would say, hey, I'm completely neutral. I don't feel happy or sad, right? $1 is the same as 4 quarters, okay? Let's go back, put the rook back, put the bishop back, give white his bishop back. There was another solution. The rook could travel sideways to the square a6, maybe you saw that one, and again, the rook defends his bishop. So if white captures and white gets a bishop, black's rook would just capture back. You can probably see that in your head without me even making the moves on the chessboard. Okay, notice it would not be a smart idea for the rook to go on the attack. Chess is not always about attacking. If you move your rook sideways and you stop here thinking you're going to get the white bishop, well, I've got news for you. White has a brain too. Okay, in this case, it's me. I'm going to play white. I've got a brain. And this bishop will go all the way up and capture the other bishop, and this rook can do nothing about it. Now we're back to cat versus mouse, but you know what? I have half a brain. So if the rook moves up to attack the bishop, Fun Master Mike's half of a brain will land on d5, and around we go, and I think I'll be able to keep my bishop safe. Okay, gonna move on. We're gonna do one last thing. I'm gonna give you another idea about how advanced chess players think. Bishops work really well in tandem with each other when they're attacking. But you know what? They actually don't do a good job of being each other's BFF when they're being attacked. Okay, let me show you what I mean. In this position, white has both bishops. You're actually going to start every chess game with one bishop on a light square and one bishop on a dark square. Okay, and in this position, this bishop might travel to the square c4. Okay, and on the next turn, I know I'm not being like a real-life chess player. Black would normally get to make a move. But on the next turn, this bishop could cozy up beside the first bishop, and you can see how powerful of a pair these bishops are. This bishop is shining a laser beam at that rook on a8, and this bishop is attacking the blank square beside it in case the black rook tries to get away. Here, the black rook is what we would call trapped. He can't move down because you can't capture or jump over your own piece. That would be very silly. And if black rook travels left, because of this bishop, he's blocked in. He can only go one square, but if he goes one square, the other bishop is waiting for him. So that's just one example of how the bishops work really well when they are a pair working together. But I also told you that they don't do a very good job defending each other. For example, let's just leave the chessboard right here. Let's pretend it's black's move. The black rook could travel down to the square g4, and the black rook is making a pin of his own. This rook is aiming at this bishop, but if that bishop moves, then the bishop behind him would be in danger, and there's no way the bishops can guard each other like we saw in our previous example, because remember, when a bishop starts the game on a dark square, he can never ever land on a light square. Of course, the opposite is also true, so bishops can never defend each other. They can hold hand in hand when they're attacking, but when they're defending, they need some other BFFs to come into the game. So in this position, white will surely lose one of the bishops. Yeah, white can choose which bishop to lose, but again, if the first bishop moves out of the way, the bishop behind it would be captured. There you go. Now you know everything that I know about the bishop. We've already learned the rook, and you might be able to guess what we're going to do in our next video. We're actually going to melt the rook and the bishop together. Do you know what piece we're going to get? Well, stay tuned, because in our next video, we will find out.